Hi guys, I just wanted to make a video on how to create a. I know Snooper Facts created a video on how to create an Onward map. Uh, I know it's been a while since he did that. It was mostly written for PC in mind. I wanted to show you how to a little bit more of an up-to-date process on creating an Onward map, and then go into some of the details on how you optimize a map to get to actually run on Quest. Some of the steps you'll need to take. Uh, so let's go ahead and get started. First, I wanted to show you, or right now I'm kind of rendering the lighting on one of my other maps. It's going to be doing that in the background. Once that finishes, I'll probably pause the video and I'll come back to this later. But for now, I'll show you the steps you need to take, I guess. And some of the gotchas that a lot of people kind of skim over in the guide. Um, and this way, I don't have to answer all these questions and repeat the same mistakes people make. So, first off, you're going to want to download the Unity hub. Make sure when you install Unity, you'll see this is what it looks like initially. You'll see under installs the different versions of the Unity editor. You got to use the 2019.4.8 F1. I see a lot of people using the newer version. Do not do that, it won't work. You have to use this version. The next thing, when you're installing it, you need to make sure that you install the Android build support and the IL2CPP Windows build support. And if you install it with the hub, you can add those later by coming here, clicking that button, clicking add modules. If you don't, then you'll have to basically reinstall it and try to use the hub. It's a lot easier. Um, Install that version, and then I'm gonna kind of skim over some of the easier stuff. If you can't figure out the easier stuff, the Snoopers video should be able to get you out of the way there too. And just read the guide. You got to read every line in the guide. A lot of people skim it and they miss steps. Um, but I'll show you. Yeah, I'll kind of glide through a lot of this easier stuff. Um, this is for making a quest map, which takes a little bit more. Um, So now that once you have that installed, you'll come in, you'll create a new project, click new project, and you got to make sure the editor version here matches the version you want to use. So 2019.4.8 F1, and that will give you some different templates here. They're different based on the version of Unity. You're going to want to use the uh, URP 3D sample scene. That's another big mistake I see people make. A lot of people just come in here with the default settings. It's not. You want to make sure you're using the universal render pipeline. Um, for this project, I'm going to show you using the asset pack, the same one they used for the upstairs of Subway. Actually, I think it's a pretty optimized. I don't want to use anything too complicated because by the end of this video I won't have it quest compatible. Um, I want to use something that realistically I can get into quest range, um, and but also looks decent. I don't want to. There's also another number one asset pack people use, the RPG FPS assets by I think it's like Dimitri something. Um, and my lighting just failed. I'll look at that later. Um, but yeah, you want to use the URP sample scene. I'm going to use a Subway asset pack because it's pretty optimized. It's not quite Quest compatible, but with a little bit of extra steps, I can show you how to make it. So I'm just going to call it Subway 2, and I'm going to call it Subway 2 because I already tried Subway 1 and I failed, so I just started a new video. This is my second attempt. And apologies, I'm kind of new to this whole tutorial thing, so I'm feels weird talking to myself, but it is what it is. We'll get going. So I'm on two monitors right now, or a couple of monitors, but on my other monitor right now, it's doing its work, doing its thing. And you can have multiple Unity windows open at the same time if your computer can handle it. This is just another project I'm working on in the background. Okay, so my window has opened. You can't see most of it because it's over here. Um, bring it over. And you can set up different layouts. There's a lot of different windows you have to work with when you're doing Unity, so multiple monitors is really nice, but I have layouts set up. I think this is the one I'm going to use because it has everything on one monitor. Um, and each of these windows, you can drag around. You can arrange them however you want. So yours might not match mine based on the default settings. That's okay. You don't have to match them. Just know that each of these windows is completely separable and you can put them wherever. Um, I call this one full because it has most of the stuff I need. If you don't see a specific window that I end up using later, just know that you can access them here. They'll usually be in one of these things. Some other ones are going to be in different spots. Just we'll go over those later. But if you can't find one, just Google it. Where is this window, and it will tell you. So the first one I'm going to use, you'd go to Window Package Manager, and I already have it open. It's right here. Um, and this shows you different things you can import into your project. There's also from different sources. So right now I'm looking at the Unity registry. These are things that are built into Unity. Um, for the most part, you're just starting off just to show you. We'll deal with the assets that you downloaded from the Unity store, and this is where they'll show up. If not all of them show up, click this refresh button. It should get everything that you've downloaded. Next, I will start importing the assets I'm going to use. I'll just start importing them as I use them, as I talk about them. Um, and so I mentioned I was going to use the one from Subway that is called Modular City Alley Pack. So you click import, and while it's importing, I'll talk about these screens. Hierarchy, that's the different things that are in your scene. You'll use that a lot. Project is where you have different stuff that you've imported into your project, um, your assets and everything. For Modular City, I'm just going to import the whole thing. You can come through and select exactly what you want out of here. If it's your first time, I just recommend importing the entire asset pack. The inspectors where you set properties about different things. We'll go over that. Just know that the difference between the hierarchy and the project view is the project is all the assets in your pack, and the hierarchy is the stuff that is actually in your scene already, that you've already placed in your map. I'm going to put this package manager down here for now. We will need that later. I don't think it did. It hit it somewhere. Whatever. Oh no, it's there. Computer's just being a little slow. Lots importing. I can talk about some of the different tools that you'll need for this. The bakery is the number one thing I'd recommend. It's going to cut down your lighting times significantly. Maybe I can't recommend it too much because I never actually used the official Unity built-in lighting tool. I just kind of went straight to the bakery. It uses your GPU instead of your CPU to render your lighting, which is a huge difference. It cuts your lighting times down from stuff that would take like 10 hours will only take like 15 minutes using the bakery. Um, So it just saves you a lot of time, and maybe it's not time that you're actually sitting in front of your computer, but when you're talking about this, you got to you're gonna have to render the lighting maybe like 10 to 12 times before you submit your first map until you get a point where you're finally happy with it. So yeah, it saves a lot of time. Once you got your asset pack imported, you most asset packs, if not everyone I've ever seen, comes with a sample scene. You usually find that in this like if you open up in the folder, they're always in a different spot. Usually it's pretty self-explanatory. For this one, it's in the scenes folder, and you can change the slider to show the way it sends it. I hate this one where it doesn't show you the whole thing, but we're gonna open up the day one, show you a subway during the day, and it opened it. And you're gonna notice everything's pink. This is one thing everyone always struggles with. I struggled with it too. It's that's just how it looks when you open up an asset pack and you're using URP. You have to basically set the shaders to compatible shaders to get it to fix. So I think next let's import the Onward SDK so that we can get the shaders that Onward uses. Um, and you don't have to know what a shader is yet. We'll go over that. Just know that you're gonna have to download the Onward SDK, and there it is. I've already downloaded it. I'm gonna open it. That's gonna import it into our project. That's gonna pop up this window saying you have to set this. Just click apply. Next, we need to start setting up our project settings. So go to edit, project settings, uh, and here under quality, you need to import the Onward's universal render pipeline asset. So that's this bottom one here, universal render pipeline asset underscore renderer. Um, you're gonna have to put that in, drag that into this spot right here, or maybe it's the other one. Sorry, it's the asset one, not the renderer. I always get those mixed up. Also, while you're in here, might as well set some settings that we're going to need to use later in order to get accurate measurements on how our map is performing. Um, so if we wanted to kind of see what the quest is going to see, um, you got to set the load bias to 1.18 and the maximum load to 1. And what a LOD is kind of like you'll end up using different models of an asset. Like let's say you have a barrel, for example. That's the one I always tell people. That barrel can be very round, and that's a lot of triangles. You can basically create LODs of that barrel, where you have one that's like less round, looks more hexagonal, and then you have one that's like almost a square. And basically, when the player is a certain distance from that barrel, it's going to draw a different model. And we'll go into those in more detail. But what these are doing basically is the multiplier on that distance. That's what the LOD bias is. I'm not sure if it gives a good description here if I hover over it. It's not doing it right now, but the LOD bias is the multiplier that applies to that distance in order to figure out what distance it should draw certain things. And maximum LOD level is the maximum LOD version of that barrel it's going to display. So for Quest maps, one way that they keep it running better on Quest versus PC is they won't show you the LOD 0 model. Everything's like slightly lower quality. You're getting the lower quality versions of those objects. Um, So to mimic it, we're basically going to set the maximum LOD level to 1 and the LOD bias to 1.18. We also need to disable the SRP batcher, and the way you do that is you click on the, make sure that you're using the, that you know which one you're using, and see how it's like highlighting over here, this. I'm going to click on that and make sure that this is not checked. I thought that by default that was checked, but you want to make sure that it's not checked. Um, Other than that, there's a couple other places in here you have to set some stuff. Make sure the scripting backend is set to IL2CPP. A lot of people don't do that, or don't have that set right. You also want to have the stereo rendering set to single pass. I forget exactly where that is. Whatever, we'll ignore it for now. We'll come back to that later when it complains at us. So for now, I'm going to close that. We now have the Onward SDK in, and I think we have our project mostly set up. We might have to adjust a few things later when I remember what they are. And now we're going to start fixing the pink stuff. I have a script that will do most of this work for you, but I'm going to show you how to do one or two of them manually, just so that you understand the process, because I think it's an important thing to learn. If the script has errors or doesn't fix everything in your scene, you're gonna want to, know how to solve that. I might help you with it if I have time, but I'd rather you attempt it yourself. So let's say this railing right here. Let's fix that from being pink. It's a fire escape, I guess. In here, you can see all the different things. In the inspector, you can see all the different components that this fire escape has. I'll go over each of them real quick at a high level. Fire escape, this is a mesh filter. That's the mesh it's going to use for these other components. Mesh renderer, this is what's going to draw it. So if I were to disable that, it no longer draws it. Um, and right here you have the material that it's using, but that's also listed at the bottom of this page. We'll go over that later. These box colliders, that's where bullets are going to hit. And for most of the stuff in your scene, you're going to want to use box colliders where you can, but I don't like using them for most of the things. You really want to use mesh colliders for most of the stuff on your map. Like this, for example, is a prime example. If a player tries to shoot through those railings, it's going to hit one of those box colliders. You can see them drawn in green here, and it's going to stop the bullet. And we don't want that. So we're going to want to remove those. I'll do it on this one, but what I'm about to do is not best practice. I just want to show you. Basically, we can remove that, and you're going to see those boxes disappear if they aren't already. Remove, remove, and then we'll add a mesh collider. And that mesh collider already has the right mesh set. That's going to be true if you have a mesh filter on it. And basically that's now it's a perfect there's no invisible walls on this. It's a bullet's going to go right through those things, but it's also going to hit a beam. That's just better collision, but it's more intensive to do that, to have a mesh glider than to use box gliders. So use box gliders where you can, um, but most things will need a mesh collider if you don't want to have like players shooting invisible stuff. It's just not as good performance-wise. Um, so then we're going to fix our material. This one's using rusty metal tiled. It has the material is kind of like the settings on how to draw the object, like what kind of texture file it's going to put on it, and what kind of effects are going to go on that texture file. Um, for about 98% of the stuff on your map, and by the way, you have to use Onward shaders, and the shader is kind of like the effect of how it's going to draw on that. For most of the stuff on your map, you're going to use a shader called PP Opaque Lit. But if I were to set it to PP Opaque Lit, um, and Opaque Lit is what you use for the PC version. The Quest version, you want to use Opaque Simple Lit. And the difference is the Opaque Lit will take into account normal maps, which if you want to Google that, you can. You don't really need to know it for this video. That's kind of a more advanced thing. I'll just ignore the fact that they exist for now. But if you want to look into normal maps and what those are, let's just stick simple, and we'll keep it on the simple version. It's this is a much more highly performing shader. Um, so I changed it, but you'll notice it just turned it gray. It's not textured anymore, or it never was, but it's not textured, and we want it to be textured. And that's determined by the base map, and there's no texture file in there right now, which is why it's showing white. Um, so we want to apply the appropriate texture file, and not every asset pack that you use off the store is going to have a good naming convention. A lot of them will just kind of be like rusty metal tiled, but to make sure you're using the right one, I'm going to Control Z and go back and just show you. That's what this is right here, this rusty metal tiled base color. So we're going to set this to P. That's how you know which one's the right one. Um, this rusty metal tiled, I'm going to set it to PP Opaque Simple Lit, and then I'm going to change the base map to use that rusty metal tiled base map. And you can either click here and type it in, or if you had selected it like I just did, you can drag it from over here. And now you can see it has a texture. Now there's other properties in this material, and the material is shared by everything on the scene that uses that material. So you can see that we just set the texture and properties for everything that's using rusty metal tiled on the scene. Um, but there's other properties to the material, like the base color. I believe, in my experience, you kind of want to just set this to white for everything, and you can see I can do whatever with it. I can make it blue if I wanted to, but I think you basically just want to set it to white, just to start and get an idea of what it's going to look like. Um, if you want to make variants of this material, you can too. Uh, we don't need to get into that now, but you can create your own materials here, create material, and then you can set your own properties of it. Um, okay. So some other things you want to check are enable GPU instancing. I don't think you need to understand what that is other than it needs to be checked. That's going to increase the efficiency of your map. Basically, that's going to allow, I keep saying you don't need to know what it is, and I explained it anyway, but that's going to allow all these things to be drawn in one draw call, as opposed everything using this material and that mesh. Um, we'll go into draw calls later. Um, yeah, for now I would say just make sure that's checked. The other stuff in here you can pretty much ignore. The only other one that you might use is alpha clipping, and that's something you want to avoid whenever. Um, I'll show you real quick. This fence right here is using alpha clipping. This fence, by the way, has two materials on it. Um, so rusty metal tiled is this out piece, and the chain link fence is using another material called metal chain link fence. Again, we'll come in here, we'll find the image file, and then we'll change it to PP opaque simple lit, and then we will add the base color. We'll change it to white, and we'll apply enable GPU instancing, but you can't see through it. And the reason is because the texture file itself, if you can kind of see it in here, it has a gray background. Alpha clipping is what will disable that. So if I were to check this checkbox, you can see it disappeared, and you can adjust the threshold of what it considers gray right here, so you can kind of see it. You'll get a little bit thinner or thicker wire. Um, just kind of set it there for now, and that's looking better. So now what I'm going to show you is now that I've shown you how to adjust the material and how to set it for a couple of objects, and obviously you got to go through here and do each one of these. It's a really tedious process. So I have written a script that makes it easier. And what I'm going to do now is go into one of my other projects that I'm currently working on, and I'm going to grab the script from here. It's not included in the Onward SDK, but basically I went in and I edited one of their scripts. Um, and all I did was add a couple lines in here. I'm just going to take this script, copy it, and I'll share the script so you can use it. You won't have to copy this over. You'll just download it and import it into your project. Um, so now I'm going to find that same script in here. I'll edit the script. And it's basically the same thing. I think I just changed some of this stuff right here. Save it, minimize it. Now it's importing that script in, and then I basically just took their tool, and this is going to scan all the scene for all the incompatible shaders that it's using. So I can take everything that's using the standard shader. I can replace it with and this is a built-in tool by them, by the Onward devs. Uh, and we want to change everything that's standard to PP opaque simple lit, and we're going to put that in as a destination. Then when I click replace, it's going to replace every use of the standard shader, and the change I made to their script will basically store the texture file that was on the shader. This is just log message for me, but then it's going to replace the shader, and then it's going to turn the base color white. I didn't do the enable GPU instancing. Maybe that's something I'll add before I actually give this over to you guys. So when I click replace, it should replace everything using the standard shader with PP opaque simple lit, and it's also going to transfer over the texture file, which is the other manual process we just did, and then it's going to also set the base color to white. And there we go. You're going to see a couple things that look weird. This right here is a alpha clipped material. So we can enable that, and it's probably not using the right material. I'm probably just going to delete those. You probably want to use opaque lit, not simple lit, to make those kind of shiny. But now you can start to see this is here's a tree, leaves are alpha clipped. You want to try to avoid alpha clipping as much as possible because it is very inefficient, especially if a player has to get up right next to it and has to every pixel that's see-through, it has to like double draw. I don't fully understand that, but it has to like basically double draw the stuff that's behind it, and that's just really like terrible for performance. So if it's up high, like if this tree were like up, well, that's if this tree were up here, it wouldn't be as big of an issue. But if it's like something that a player can get right up next to, like these chain link fences here, which is, if you know Subway, you know there's no chain link fence here, and I'm assuming that's why. Yeah. See, it's almost the same, but yeah, they changed a couple of things. Uh, should be a tunnel there. I think when Dante first created this, that's basically what he did. Is he added a section here and a section over here. Um, okay, so we have our onward scene, kinda, or a scene. And yeah, you're gonna want to remove like anything that's alpha clipped like that. I think they replaced this with not a chain link fence, but like a metal spiked fence, which is better because it's not alpha clipped. And by the way, that's why there's no like woods maps or anything like that um, in Onward, really. Okay, so all right, now I'm going to show you how to get some statistics on this, just to show you that there's no chance in hell this is going to run on Quest. The quest limits are 85,000. I'm going to delete this, by the way. It's just, that's if you're making your own game. It's how reflection probes we can bake. You don't need to really know what that is. That's more advanced if you want to look that up and Google it on your own. I'm just going to go ahead and delete all these decals because the hell we don't need them. They look like shit. Alright, so to get the stats, I'm going to go to the game view, make sure there's no cameras already in my scene. If there was, it would be adding to the stats. And then I'm going to create a camera. So here's a camera. Um, and the game view is going to show you what that camera sees. And as you can see, there's 2,800 batches and 382,000 trees at this particular viewpoint. And if I were to take this camera and move it around, you can see that changes. That's the number of trees and stuff that this camera can see at the current moment. Um, so to mimic the quest stats, we have to do a couple things here too. We have to change the field of view to, I think you're supposed to use horizontal. That's just a guess. And the field of view should be 120. And you're gonna see that changes the trees and stuff a little bit. You can see we're a long ways away from Quest compatible. We have to. Oh yeah, other thing, you have to change the resolution to 2880 by 1440. If you don't do that, then these numbers are going to change based on what the camera can see. So moving it's going to adjust those numbers. Um, so anyway, this is accurate numbers. This is how this quest would perceive this scene. And that is way too high. Remember, we're limited to 85,000 trees and 75 batches. So what we can do to reduce that, um, the first thing I would recommend is making sure you have GPU instancing enabled. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to go to all the materials in my scene. And you want to set enabled GPU instancing on all of these. Uh, some of these are not using PP opaque simple lit. I believe some of them can't even be set to it. So I'm just going to go to the materials in the modular city because I believe we set all of those to it. Trying to think of the best way to do that. We'll just set them all quick here. By the way, that script is only going to go through the materials that you have in your current scene. So since this is a sample scene, it may not be using all of the materials that came in the asset pack. I mean, it's just a creation. So right now I'm just going to set everything that's not in this Uh, Not in this sample scene. That didn't get set by my script. I just set it to PP opaque simple lit, and now I'm enable GPU instancing on it. Skies, these are definitely not. These you want to use PP cube map, and you don't have to worry about the GPU instancing on that. And for these, enable GPU instancing as well. And look at our batches now. We were at 3,300. Now we're down to 1,000, and that's because again with the enable GPU instancing, it can now draw this wall in the same draw call. It can draw that wall. And in order for a draw call to be batched together, and you can see here saved by batching 2,354, that means it's using one. It's putting two draw calls into one batch and doing both of these at the same time. And that's because they use both the same mesh, the same material, and they're both on the same light map. Um, and we'll talk about the light map later, but just understand that, again, in the mesh filter, we have this mesh. Um, and all four of these objects are using the same mesh, and they all have the same materials applied to it. Now this is actually four draw calls because it's using four materials. Um, and each one of those is basically just a texture file. Anything that has an emission map, you want to turn on emission for as well, and that just kind of makes things like this lamp right here, glow white. It's going to make these windows here probably glow yellow, and yeah, anything that has an emission map, turn on emission. The reason this one already had it set is because Street Shops was the same material that was being used, I believe, somewhere else where we set that up. Neon signs will probably have an emission map, I would guess. Make them pop a little bit. Um, okay. So yeah, that brought our batches down to 1,037, which is much better. Still nowhere near 75, but we're getting there. Um, okay. So I guess the next thing to show you would be how to combine meshes and materials into let, and that way it can make less draw calls. Um, yeah, so the way I kind of do my maps is I kind of categorize everything into one of two categories. Either it's an object with a lot of trees, like very highly complex, trigonometry, or geometry, I should say, but uh, things with a lot of curves. If I were to select this, you can count the individual triangles here. And the subway asset pack is actually pretty good. It's pretty well optimized. Like they couldn't have done that much better. If you look at the actual individual triangles here, to make something that round, that's actually pretty decent. Uh, so this has box gliders, so I can't really show you. I mean, I could if you enable. Now we can see the actual individual triangles on it. You can see they did a pretty decent job. But if you look at things that are rounds, there's going to be a lot more triangles on them than something that's like square. Obviously these have some some details in them, so they aren't perfectly. It's not a perfect. If you were to have like a straight up cube, it would be 12 triangles, and that's because there's 6 sides. Each side is a square. A square is 2 triangles. Trash can probably has a lot of trees. You can count them. There's if you want to actually view how many trees an object has, you can in the mesh filter, you can click on it, and you can select it here. It will tell you down here 488 trees, or you can um, see it there. Whereas like this wall here, pretty squarish, only 18 triangles on that one. So for the most part, you want to try and use low like squarish objects in your map. Because remember, we got to get these trees down to 85,000. Most sample scenes that I see, they have like 3 or 4 million trees to start off with. That's why I wanted to use this one. It's pretty optimized up to the point where this pipe here has a lot. So if you're just trying to like go the easy way out, you might just want to. Your map won't look as good, but you might just want to go around and like take some of these complex things like that they're not really necessary to make the map work, and just delete them. If you want to consider them for later, usually I just go in and I remove the mesh or disable the mesh renderer. Now it's not there. It still has a box collider. You can just disable the whole object if you want to disable all the components. Um, but I'm going to leave it in. I'm going to try to optimize this to make it run in Quest. Um, like I was saying, you want to categorize everything. Um, Either it's going to be a high triangle object, or it's either it's going to be a high poly count object, um, or you want to find all the low polygon objects. And I wrote a script to do this too, but again, I'd like to show it to you manually just so you understand the process. So let's bring some of those down just to clean it up a little bit. Walls, these are going to be low triangle count, I would say. Um, Pretty much all of these are going to be low triangle. So let's show you how to combine those. I want to take all of these walls and make them one object. Um, Leaving behind just this stuff, which a lot of the stuff you can see is like probably higher in trigonometry. It didn't grab this. This is just a light blocker. It looks like we'll throw. You know what? We'll throw those in too. So I'm going to talk about MeshBaker. MeshBaker is a tool that is on the Unity store, and it is what I believe you should be using. There's a lot of tools to do this, and there's some cheap ones out there. MeshBaker is a little bit more complex to use, but it's way more powerful. You can do a lot more with it. Um, so first I'll show you how to combine this into one mesh, which is probably the right use case of this. Um, Again, you're going to end up with a lot of materials. So like this right here, that's a wall piece. It has 2 materials, 1 mesh. This is 2 draw calls because it has to draw each material separately. Um, this here has four materials. It's going to be 4 draw calls. So MeshBaker, by the way, it has 2 different versions. There's a free version, uh, which I think has all the features you need to make a simple map. I don't have that. I have the paid one, so I'm gonna import that into my project now. Brandon, I'm gonna bring up the package manager. And I'm going to import MeshBaker. Again, there's a free version. You can try that. If it doesn't do everything you need, go for the paid one, which is 80 bucks. It's not cheap, but it's definitely, I think it's one of the more useful tools in terms of what you should get. If you want to start making Onward maps, I would recommend the bakery first, which is like 45 bucks, and then I would get MeshBaker, unless you're okay with the free version and you're happy with the features it has. Um, okay, so I just imported MeshBaker. What that did is it created a tool, I believe. Oh no, under game objects, now I have an option to add MeshBakers. So first I'll just show you the MeshBaker, which is just combining meshes to make like a bunch of objects into one object. And then I'll show you the material baker, which can combine not only the object, but objects with lots of materials like this. You can combine those into one material. Since they're all using the same shader, they're all you can create an atlas is basically a texture file, um, which this kind of basically already is. As you can see, there's like a lot of different pieces in this texture file, and I think for this one, like street props is a good example. Storage prop set. So this is gonna have like, maybe that's not the best one. Street lights. This has I don't know if you can see it, but it has a lot of different texture texture files, of more than just what this thing is. It has the texture file of this. It has the texture file of like these. They're sharing the same texture file, which is just a combination of all those signs. Um, and that way you have this one material that gets applied to this sign. It gets applied to this sign. Um, okay, so all right, we have MeshBaker installed. Um, Now I'm going to go ahead and get on with it. So you go down, you go create other, and you create a MeshBaker. And MeshBaker is the simplest part of this product. And what I'm going to call this one, I'm going to call it Wall Baker, because we were talking about how the walls are kind of low trigonometry objects. And I'll explain later like why you want to why you want to combine low trigonometry objects. That'll come way later. But just for now, know that you want to try to do the low ones. So I'm going to rename this to Wall Baker. And usually, kind of the way I organize my stuff, I create an empty, then I create walls, then I put a Wall Baker in it, then I create another empty, and I call this one Wall Objects. Um, and then I drag everything I want to combine into that baker into there. So I'm going to put my walls, I'm going to put my floors, my roofs. Are those low trigonometry? Yeah, kind of. This is 20 trees. I'll call that low trigonometry. I'd say anything under like 150 is kind of low. But it really depends on your use case of when you'll do that. So now that I have my wall objects, this is everything I'm going to combine. Oh, nope, we want to grab the light breakers too, because those are pretty low trigonometry. They're like 12 trees each, I bet, right? They're cubes. 12 trees. Um, we're going to combine all, whoops. We're going to combine all this stuff and leave behind all this. We're going to make this one object, so it's only one draw call. Everything there. So next you go to your wall baker, which is the thing we created earlier with game object, create other, mesh baker, and we'll drag all of our wall objects over to here. Now if I expand this list, you'll see there's 1100 objects here we're going to combine. Um, For typical use case, I like to generate a new UV2 layout. That's how the lighting is kind of works. We might be going over the triangle count limit here. I'm not really sure. We'll know in a minute. And I'm gonna click bake. That's gonna create our single mesh of all those objects, and it just finished. Now we have a solid object, and this is all just one giant object, and it has, all the materials in the world, all the materials that were on the other stuff. So it's not one draw call anymore. This is now, let's see, it has 23 materials on it now. This is a 23, 23 draw calls to draw this whole thing. So I'm going to move it back down. And then we'll go back to our baker, and we still have, all the stuff that we just combined. So it's kind of like we have a second copy of it now. But in MeshBaker, you can come down here. I'm not going to scroll all the way down. I'll just hide all that and disable the renderers on source objects. And the reason you don't want to delete them, the reason is because these objects, they still have the colliders. So like this wall right here, it has a box collider on it, but it's no longer drawing it. And that's kind of the best practice way to handle that. Another way you could do it is you could come on here and then you could just add a mesh collider to this. Um, and now this is also going to have the collision, but you don't want to do it that way. And the reason is because you could have different objects in this giant mesh that have different materials. And real quick, I'll show you how to do that. I'm not going to do it for everything because that would take a lot of time. But for each object in your scene like this, you need to add a set physics material. And that kind of determines, that's another built-in thing to the Onward SDK that you kind of have to import. Uh, the set physics material, you can choose what type of material it is, and that's going to determine what sound it makes when a bullet hits that object. If a bullet can go through it, like wood penetrable, or wood unpenetrable where it can't go through it, it's going to determine like the footsteps, like if this floor right here, what sound it makes when someone walks on it. Um, and so basically what we've done is we've kind of separated out the objects from the renderer, or the renderer and the colliders on this stuff. So the objects is still going to hold all the collision data and all that stuff, and this combined mesh that we created with the baker. This is what popped out when we clicked bake here. We're going to call it the wall renderer. That's kind of how I organize my stuff. And then we'll drag it into that walls too. And just to organize a little more, because remember I said we basically are going to sort everything. We're going to create another empty, and we're going to call this one combined objects. And our walls is now a combined object. Why did we do all that? It brought our draw calls down to 291. It was at like 1,000 before. Trees are still kind of high, and usually the more stuff you combine, the higher your trees go. The reason being, this is what I said I would explain later, earlier. Um, the reason you want to combine low tree objects is because you can kind of, I guess maybe it's better to explain this when we go into LODs. Did I disable everything? Not sure why that's double drawing. Maybe that's just how the asset came. Is that part of the combined mesh? Yeah, it is. So that's just how the asset came. Ignore that. Um, right. And now that the object's combined and we generated new UVTs, the lighting's going to be kind of weird, but that'll get fixed later when we generate the lighting. But yeah, the reason you want to there's other optimization techniques. You can turn on something called occlusion culling. This isn't something that they recommend for quest scenes, but if I were to like bake the occlusion culling and then visualize it, which I think we are, you'll see that there's nothing here anymore. So now the occlusion culling is only showing what's visible to the camera. And so you can see like when I move it into this courtyard, it draws everything that's in that courtyard. The reason it's not making the walls disappear and that sort of thing is because the walls are now one giant mesh. We just combine them all into one. That's one object. Um, so when even though the camera's over here, it still has to draw all these walls. Um, and remember, the reason we did that is because we have to bring the batches down to 75. We also have to bring the trees down to like 85K. And the best way to do that I found is to take the simple objects and make turn those into like one object, and that way you can still like kind of hide the more complicated stuff, like the stuff that's in this courtyard. You can hide that stuff. You know, if we were to combine those in with our giant mesh, the trees would be like off the charts right now. It'd have to draw like all the complicated stuff, even when the camera's way over here. So we're just going to do it with the simple stuff, and that's the way we bring our batches down. But as you do that, know that you're going to increase your trees because now it has to draw stuff that the camera can't see. Um, Now, occlusion culling was just kind of a quick, cheap way for me to show you that. I'm going to clear the data on it. Now it's going to draw everything everywhere, and you're going to see the trees have gone way up, 747K. This sample scenes usually come with occlusion culling data already built in. Um, like when I officially loaded this up and showed you that it had 400 whatever trees, it was using some sort of occlusion culling there. And now that there's nothing on it, it's just drawing everything that's in that direction. It's still not going to draw the stuff that's behind the camera, but it will draw the stuff that is, in the camera's direction. Now it doesn't have any knowledge that this is behind a wall. So it's drawing that. That's kind of what occlusion culling is it hides things that the camera cannot see, and you can fill in some of this data here. I'm not going to go fully into that. You can look up a YouTube video on that. It's pretty simple, what these different things mean. But for the official Onward documentation guide says do not use occlusion culling because it is takes a lot of CPU power to run. So if you are going to use occlusion culling, it's a good way to bring down the trees on your map, but you have to keep your batches much lower under those situations. And that's because when we're looking at these stats here, think trees is heavy on the GPU, batches is heavy on the CPU. By the way, the batches went way up too because again, no occlusion culling, so it's drawing a bunch of stuff that you know. If I were to bake it again, you can see that goes way down. Um, okay, so that's how to combine meshes and what you should be combining. Um, Next, I can show you how to lower your tree counts. I'm going to take a break though. It's been about 30 minutes or so. Yeah, I'm going to take a break. When I come back, I'll show you how to lower your tree counts, and after that, you kind of just have to balance things. But yeah, I'll be back in a minute. Hey guys, I'm back and I just wanted to say I think where the video left off, I was gonna go start going over LODs. We had just practiced combining a mesh to make one giant mesh, um, and that helps reduce draw calls. But I realized there was some stuff I didn't go over, which I probably should have. Um, and before I dip into LODs, I just want to finish off the whole combining meshes thing, which is the primary tactic you'll use to reduce draw calls. Um, so where we left off, we created this one giant mesh of all the simple. I kept saying trigonometry, but it's geometry. The simple geometry in the scene into one giant mesh, and we can see here if we click on it. It's 76,000 trees in that one giant mesh. So even then, if this was the only thing in our map, that would be okay. But we need to reduce the trees on that, and we'll go over that later. There's kind of a more advanced way that you can combine meshes, and I'll show you that later. I just wanted to show you the basics when we did this. Um, But again, this is a object that has 21 different materials, which means it's 21 draw calls, which is probably too big of a chunk. If we wanted to have a lot of different objects like we do here, one, two, three, each of these is going to be another draw call because they're all different meshes, and most of them are probably using different materials. So we want this to be less than 21 draw calls. That's a third of our budget in terms of the number of batches we can have or draw calls or whatever you call them. So the way we do that is we combined the mesh, and that's great, but we really want to combine all these materials into one material. Um, and again, a material is just a way to draw an object. It's drawing this texture file. I think if I were to bring that up in my project view, just to show you, this is what that texture file looks like. And it's just, an image of this piece of concrete. So what I'm going to do, we're going to use one of the more complicated, or one of the more complex pieces of MeshBaker that we haven't dove into yet. And I'm going to start with something simple. This mesh right here is a little bit more complex because it uses a tiling on the texture file. For example, let me pull up one of these. Let me pull up like a brick wall. This is going to be a tiled texture most likely. So if I were to look at this one, this is what that texture file looks like, and you can tell it's repeating itself on here. And by the way, you can tile textures. I didn't go over that, but that's kind of just a basic, like, if I wanted to tile this 2 times by 2 times, I don't think that's brick wall dark. That's probably just brick wall light or something like that. Wherever this is being used, I should be tiling it twice now. Um, anyway, I can't figure out exactly where that's being tiled. So any texture that's being tiled, I found this is the big difference between MeshBaker and some of the free alternatives. They don't have a way to handle that as easily. Um, but again, we'll dig into tiled textures in a minute. For now, I'm just going to show you the simple stuff. So let's say we wanted this table, which is using uh, a material called storage prop set, and this sign, which is using a material called neon signs, and we wanted to combine those into one texture file. That way, if they had the same mesh, they don't, but if they had the same mesh, we could combine that mesh so it's using. In fact, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this table and this sign, and we're gonna turn it into a combined mesh, so that is one object. Um, and we're going to combine its materials so that it's one object with one material, and this table and this sign is going to become one draw call, whereas right now it is two because it's two different meshes with two different materials. So the way that we do that is I'm going to create a game object, create other MeshBaker, and previously used the MeshBaker. Now I'm going to show you a texture and MeshBaker. Um, so I'll create one of those, and this is it right here. Again, this is going to be a combined object, and this is just going to be an example, but I'm going to keep it organized anyway. Um, so we have our walls, which is one combined object. Now I'm going to make table and sign. And I'm going to drag this into there, and I'm going to call this table and sign baker. Same as before, same layout. You know, here we have the renderer, baker, and objects. So here we also want to create an empty. We'll call it table and sign objects. And just to show you what this can do, I'm gonna grab a couple of things and throw them in there. So holding down control, you can select multiple objects. I'm gonna just go ahead and throw all of these things into that. I'm actually not going to include that because this is a high tree object. I have some experience with that. You know, I think it's 1,500. Oh no, 1,000 trees. That's going to be a great thing to use an LOD on later. Um, and for now, I'm just kind of showing it to you. I'm ignoring the fact that these may be high tree objects, but I'm just going to combine all this stuff right here. These might be things that you want to throw LODs on. Again, you really want to just combine the stuff that for now, there's some advanced techniques you can use to create LODs and combined objects, but we'll go into that later. First, I want to show you each of those pieces individually. Um, so I selected a bunch of objects here. Now I'm just going to drag them down, 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 down. There might be a better way to scroll, which I haven't figured out yet. Kind of keep your project organized, though. You shouldn't have to do this that much. In an ideal world, you'll have like, you know, air ducts all put together, pipes all put together, stuff like that. Okay, so there's all of our objects that we're going to combine. And you'd probably want to do more than this, but I'm just, you know, showing it to you again. Oh, I didn't even include the sign. Yeah, let's throw some signs in there too. Um, yeah, whatever. We'll just do that. See if I can get the bottom one. Nope, we got to do some scrolling again. Okay, so we have our stuff, and I think most of the stuff is using storage prop. But there's a couple different materials in here you can see, and they each have their own texture file. I think I showed you some of those, but you can see some of these are using different ones. And I'll just bring this up as an example. This is a 2K by 2K texture file, um, and when you do this, you kind of start to lose quality in some of these image files. Depending on how you do it, you can increase the resolution of the image, but that's going to make your images larger. So generally, you don't want to if you start combining too many things, you're going to have to decrease the size of that image. Let me just show you it first, and then maybe you'll understand a little better. So here's our baker. It's the same thing as before, where we drag our objects in. Then it populates this list with the 24 renderers that are in here. By the way, if you disable these, it's still going to pull those in, which isn't a huge deal, but just know that that's something that happens. Um, and then with MeshBaker, you have to create the new material that you're going to make because you're going to be combining those materials into one material. So for this one, let's just keep the names the same. Even though this is probably more than just a table and a sign, I'm going to call it table and sign, uh, and that's going to be the material name. So then it's going to bake them into a combined material. Now, if you're tiling, you have to click this checkbox that says consider mesh UVs. And what that does is it's going to take that tiled and calculate how many times it was tiled and then throw a tiled texture into the atlas. This is another feature that most free mesh combiners do not have, and MeshBaker does. So I believe that's still a feature in the free version of MeshBaker that you can use. I haven't used it, so I don't know, but um, this is something that's necessary if you're going to combine tiled textures. In this case, I'm not. I purposely picked things that weren't, so I'm just going to leave that off for now. If you want a more efficient texture map, I always recommend clicking the resize power of 2 textures. And that's pretty much good for there. So now we're going to bake materials into combined material. This usually takes a little bit longer than creating a combined mesh. That's usually pretty quick. And just so you understand this a little bit better, I can't expand it because my computer's busy, but this is a texture baker has a texture and mesh baker has a texture and a mesh baker component, which we'll go into more detail about later. Um, so we just created our combined material. Now if I go to my project view, I can view the material that we created, and I believe we called it table and sign. Here's the material that we created. And if you look, the image that it's using is this, which is a combined texture file of all the different materials that we just merged. Um, Now, this is what I was talking about where you kind of start to lose resolution. This texture file that we created is 8K by 4K, so we didn't lose any resolution in that image because these were individual 2K images, and you can see there's 4 of them now. So this is like a 4K texture file, and it couldn't fit it all in one 4K texture file, so it ended up adding another 4K, and then it threw the one part it couldn't fit there. If you want to make things more efficient, you want to try to fill these up like properly, so the whole thing's full. That'd be the most efficient way to do it, but we don't really care. I'm just kind of showing you it right now. Um, so now that we have our combined material, what we're going to do is go down to the second part, which is the same thing we did before. This is going to create the combined mesh, and again, we want to generate a new UV2 layout that's going to basically redo the light map. And then I'm going to bake the child meshes, and we're going to disable the renderers, which is the renderer component on each of those individual objects. So disable, and now this should be one object, as you can see. And if you look at the material that it's using, it only has one material. So now this is all one draw call, even though it's a bunch of different objects. Again, if you see where my camera is right now, if you're using like occlusion culling or LOD culling, which we'll go into later, you don't know what that is yet, but I'll explain it to you later. You would be able to hide this stuff in the background. And that kind of lowers your tree count. But because we combined it, now if you even see a piece of this table, you're going to have to draw all that other stuff too. So again, you're reducing your draw calls and increasing your trees from different camera angles, which is generally like what you want to do, especially on like simple objects again. Um, but these are more complex. I was just showing you it. That's how you combine materials. So now I'm going to show you that same thing on a tiled texture like this one. So I'm going to go ahead and, just we're going to delete that whole renderer and go back to the baker and enable the source one. So now we're just going to go back and this is, you know, how it was originally, each of the individual things. Now I'm going to do that same method so that I can turn all these things into one giant mesh that isn't using 21 materials anymore. It's just going to use one material. And I'm going to do that by combining all of the things, combining all of the materials and all the textures. So same process as before. And by the way, this isn't something you would want to do in this particular use case, and I'll show you why that is. We're going to experience it firsthand here. Uh, so table and sign, well, let's throw this into the table and sign too, because this is the renderer. I never labeled that. And this is all preference. This is just kind of how I organize. I find it easiest to work with this way. That way, if I want to go in and modify what's in that combination later, I can just kind of throw stuff into the objects, and then for my baker, I just re-add them all, and that just kind of makes things easy from my perspective. So now let's go to our wall baker. We don't need this anymore because this is not a texture in MeshBaker. This is just a MeshBaker. We want to make a texture and MeshBaker on this one. I'm going to throw that into the walls. And again, we'll call it wall baker. And I'll throw all my wall objects into it. 1109 of them. This might take a little bit longer than the last one we did. So again, this time we're going to use consider mesh UVs because I know that these textures are tiled. And this is going to look atrocious, but we're going to do it anyway. Oh, some of these might not be valid. If it gives you an error like need to set texture bake result, oh, that's because we never created the material. So this is going to be wall material, and now we're going to bake everything into that. While we're waiting, I am curious because I just finished the lighting on the new paintball one. It's a little bright. I think I forgot to disable the source renderers on these. Maybe I forgot to bake them too. I'm just hiding the renderer right now. Just to show you, this is in this specific scene, I don't know if I should show you my hierarchy because I didn't organize this how I've been telling you to do it, but maybe I'm being hypocritical here, but I'm just doing what works for me. I am kind of following that, so this always load is something that no matter where the player is looking, it's going to draw that entire mesh, you know? Um, like if they could be standing here and they only see this cargo container, it's still going to render all of those cargo containers. But together, their trees actually aren't that high. These cargo containers are like they're square. They don't have a lot of triangles on them. I think it's not much. I don't have my inspector open right now. But yeah, altogether it's only 4,000 trees, which is kind of a lot. That's what 5% of your budget or something like that. So, but 5,000 for like half the map's worth of stuff isn't that bad. Whereas like this right here is 20,000 trees, or 16,000 actually I think. But yeah, you get the idea. This is that's kind of how you want to combine things. The simple things should be combined. The complicated things should put LODs on them. Um, this is one combined mesh. I think that's like another 6 or 7,000 trees. But it's always rendering that. It's always rendering this. Together, that's like 15,000 trees or something, which is a small piece of your budget compared to how much you're getting off of that. Um, and I just wanted to check it out because the lighting was done, but it failed, or I forgot to do some of the combinations, so I'm going to have to render the lighting again. We'll go into this in more detail later, but I'm going to render that in the background while I make this video. Okay, back over here we have successfully, I assume, successfully, yeah, it created the atlas for the wall, and it doesn't look that bad right now just because we haven't applied that. We still have to bake the mesh. All we've done right now is we've created the material. Um, so, wall baker, we created a material called wall material, and we'll just check it out just to show it. This is the material, this is the texture file. And you can kind of see, I'll expand it so you can get a better view. So you can see here, this is our texture file that we created. Remember how I said some of these textures were tiled? This is actually what one tiling of that texture looked like. And we have tiled it a number of times. Now it's got to keep that whole thing, which isn't really a efficient use of the space, but it will work. That's textures that could be better spent. Um, but that's what you got to do if you're going to combine a lot of That's what you're going to do if you're going to combine tiled textures. So now back to the baker. I'm going to show you why that looks bad. And we'll zoom in real close on one of these walls so you can get the full view on the detail. Um, and now I'm going to disable the renderers so it's going to disappear. And then I'm going to bake the mesh, the new mesh that we're going to use. It says it previously has previous child objects. Oh, I hit the wrong button. I hit generate MeshBakers. We want to bake it. And now you can see the resolution on that has gone down kind of significantly. Um, if we wanted to fix that, you could increase the resolution of that texture. So, and I actually expected a worse result, but that's not terrible. So I'm gonna go to the image file and well, it's using an 8K image file. That is massive. Um, we actually can't increase that anymore. That's as big as it gets. Which that's why it's not the quality didn't go down that much. But just know that this is an 8K texture file. It's 42 megabytes. which is massive. I think a 4K texture file is like 2 or 3 MB, um, which doesn't really make sense why it is. It's just I don't fully understand that, but that is what it is. Like here's a well, I guess that one's 8K too, but you're limited to the amount of RAM that the Quest has, and that you have to store these texture files into while a player plays. And that's what they said in the guide is like 350 megabytes, and that's for all the texture files on your map. That's for all the light maps. It's something that I've never personally hit. I've never gone over that. I've always tried to be kind of mindful of that as I do my stuff though. But it is a limit, and when you're using like I know they mono would scream at me right now for using an 8K texture. It's not something you want to do. You want to use 4K or 2K, um, mostly 2K. But you that's a 42 megabyte texture file, and that's just too big. You gotta use something smaller than that for most of the stuff. Maybe it's okay to use like one or two of those. Anyway, now that we did that, this is one texture file and it's using one material down from 21. That should have reduced our draw calls a decent amount. Doesn't look like it did because we only went down 21 draw calls. But if you start doing that stuff everywhere, it's going to add up. It's going to help. Is that worth the texture degradation we just got? Probably not. So, like I said, for this particular use case, we probably wanted to just combine the meshes and deal with the 21 draw calls. That said, you could individually combine some of those textures, um, maybe the ones that aren't tiled. And if you wanted to go through and do those individually, you could. I'm not going to do it in this video. That would take a lot of time. So now we've done, excuse me. Now we've done combining meshes, combining materials. I think now is an okay time where we can get into LODs. And after that, I will go into combining meshes with LODs, and after that, you should be in good shape to pretty much optimize a map. But let's go ahead and start into LODs. So I said I would use this as an example. I still think it's a good example. We'll use that. And actually, you know what? Before even going into LODs, one more thing I want to go into is prefabs, which I haven't gone into. I probably should have been the first thing I taught you. I just didn't go into it. Most of the stuff in your map is, especially in a sample scene, is going to be a prefab. Anything that's blue here is a prefab. Anything that's not is not. So like if I were to unpack a prefab, that's going to make it turn gray. That's what a non-prefab thing would look like, but we want that to be a prefab. And you want to pretty much use prefabs on everything. It's just going to make the management of your map a lot easier. Uh, and what a prefab is basically like an object that is reused over and over on your map. So you can open up prefabs and it brings you to this screen where you can just kind of edit the prefab itself. And let's say I wanted to edit this prefab and give it a different mesh, which is a weird thing to do, but we'll do it just for the sake of showing you. I'm going to change the mesh to a pipe. So now it's going to look weird because this is a pipe that has the covered box material on it, which is why it looks so strange. Anyway, if I go back to my scene now, you'll see that that covered thing has now turned into a pipe. And not only that, but every one of those on my map has turned into one of those. So just think of a prefab as like an object you can place, and that way you can edit the settings on that prefab, and it will adjust every one of those on your map. So they're all the same. But I'm going to go back into this prefab and fix it because we obviously don't want that to be a pipe. We want it to be plastic covered. So that's a prefab. Um, this is using two meshes or two materials. So if we wanted to further optimize this, what I would do is game object, create other MeshBaker, texture and MeshBaker. And this is something you cannot do with the this is something you cannot do with the free version of MeshBaker, but you can do it with the paid one. I'll show it to you anyway, just in case you decide the paid one's worth it for this feature. Just gonna drag this up here, I guess. Another useful thing to know is you can lock screens, and that's especially helpful when you're using these bakers, because sometimes you want to select multiple things and add them. So I want to lock the inspector on this screen, so that way no matter what I select, it's not going to change what is in my inspector. Usually you'd see the properties of like that specific thing you selected, but because we have this locked, this is what we're going to see. So now I want to take this, just so I don't have to scroll around, that's the reason I did that. Take this plastic covered, and we want to throw its render in. So now we have this one thing, and it's just one object, but remember this has two materials. I'll unlock it and show you. Two materials. We want to make a combined so with this texture baker, if you have the paid version of MeshBaker, you can instead of just swapping it out with a different version, you can generate a prefab. And I believe you select this, and then you can put it in a folder. We'll call this like custom prefabs. You can use whatever. I'm just doing that for a little bit of organization. Thought it would have filled that there, but again, we want to generate a new UV2 layout. In the MeshBaker itself, we want to bake into scene object is going to swap it out with a thing, but if with the paid one, you can bake the mesh into a prefab. And we'll create an empty prefab. We'll call it covered combined. So yeah, we did that. And again, this is the MeshBaker component of that texture baker. So I'm going to go back here. We still have to create the material. We'll call it covered material. Bake the material, and it's just going to combine those two things. I don't know why I just selected that. Okay, so now we have a combined material on that. Now we're going to bake the child MeshBaker, which the child MeshBaker is the one where we just said we're going to create a prefab with it. And that didn't swap it out. In fact, we're going to unselect that. And it didn't swap it out because instead it created a prefab. Covered combined. This is our prefab. And the origin point I don't believe is correctly set. Where is it? Yeah, it's way over there. If you wanted to have this thing over here like actually be in the center of that, what you would do, which is probably the right way to do it, I just don't always do it myself because sometimes I can just deal with that being off. But you would do, at least how I do it. And I'm no expert at any of this stuff. I just kind of know it. That's nobody else making a video on it, so I figured I would. But this is what I do. I'd put it at 0, 0, 0, and then in the texture baker, um, then you bake the child mesh. Now when we place this, it should be right, right in the center. Um, I'm gonna delete that, Control Z, and bring this back to where it is. But the Control Z did not undo the baking we did. So now if I were now these XYZ coordinates, these are based on the parent object. So like this 87 minus 3 107 is where it is in relation to this props. So what we want to do is throw this into the props, take this, copy these values, and then we're going to paste them on this. So that way this is going to get put into the same position that one was. And that's how you can replace it. That makes sense. It looks a little bit off. Not sure why that is. I'm not sure. Oh, probably because when we put it at 0, 0, 0, we also didn't change the rotation to 0, 0, 0 and the scale to 1, 1, 1. Whatever. We don't care about that much. So we have this, and I'm just gonna, kind of throw it there, make it look, I guess, somewhat right. Now this is an object. It's a prefab, and it's it's one material. So we just turned that object, which was two materials, into one. So it was two draw calls, now it's one. Now I'm going to take that object and we're going to create an LOD on it. Now that I've made it a prefab, we'll copy it and put another one over here to replace our other one. And I don't care what this looks like because this is just for testing. Throw a covered box right there. Now we have two of them. So now I'm going to show you the LOD. First thing we're going to need to do this is a mesh simplifier, and there's a couple free ones out there, I believe. Um, Again, I use the paid one. I think the difference between the paid one and the free one is I don't think you can make a prefab with the free one, but maybe you can. Maybe I'm wrong. Um, I'm just going to use what I have. If you want to try it, go for it. Let me know. So I opened up my package manager. Again, you get to that window, package manager, and I'm going to import my Mesh Simplify tool. Mesh Simplify is a tool, and this is the one I was talking about. It's paid versus not paid. I have the paid one. I think this is 60 bucks on the Unity store. Yeah, I'm going to import the whole thing. And the reason I have the paid one is I didn't do enough research. I didn't know a free one existed when I bought it. I couldn't find one. Later in the custom app Discord, somebody said that they had gotten one, but at that point I had already bought this one. So call me a sucker. It is what it is. I don't know. Um, so we just imported the simplify script. Now I'm going to open this prefab and we're going to create an LOD on it. Like I said, LOD is basically you create several models of the box, or in this case, this covered box. And when you're far away, you can't really tell that it's lower quality. And when you're up close, you want it to be high quality. So this is a way to like more efficiently, have higher quality objects up close. And some asset packs will come with LODs. If I were to show you paintball, I used some of them, which I'm currently generating the lighting, which again, this would be overnight, but you saw I started it and I'm almost done already. That's how much faster the bakery makes that. Um, some assets come with LODs already set up, um, which is great. Usually those LODs are not good enough for Quest. You will have to do some work to make those LODs even simpler than they already came. But a lot of asset packs, I would say most of them out there, do not have LODs on most of the objects in them. Um, when you're done with your quest map, you'll have an LOD on pretty much everything. Everything that is decently complicated, at least, like this here, 1,000 trees. This needs to be simplified. We can't afford to draw 1,000 trees from this far away. So, what I do to do this is now I'm not 100% sure this is all best practice, but this is how I do it. Um, I'm going to add a component here, and I'm going to call it a mesh collider. I like to separate out the colliders from the. I don't exactly know how the. I assume when you set up an LOD, you're just taking into account the renderers, and we'll get into this in a minute. I'll come back to that. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to make 3 versions of this, some simpler than others. So Control D is duplicate. So I want to duplicate this 3 times. Now I have 3 versions. I'm going to call this one LOD0, which is usually your highest quality one. I'm going to call this one LOD1. I'm going to call this LOD2. That's kind of the most common, I'd say, the 0 being the highest quality. If you do use the free FPS and RPG, I know that has some LODs in it. The cargo crates, the boxes, those have LODs on them. They don't come set up for you. That's something you have to set up yourself. Uh, we don't need to go into that, but in theirs, the LOD2 is actually the highest quality, and the LOD1 is the low quality one. Um, that's different from every other asset pack I've seen, but that's the most commonly used asset pack, so I just figured I'd mention it. Alright, so now we have 3 identical boxes here, and you can see I can disable this one, and you'll still see the one behind it. Disable this one. There's still another one. Disable this one. Yep, that's all 3 of them. Re-enable them. I'm going to work on the LOD1 first, so we'll disable these. And now I'm going to come in and use the Mesh Simplify script, which is called Ultimate Game Tools for some reason. So I'm going to go into the scripts. They have this script called Mesh Simplify. I'm going to go back into my component and drag Mesh Simplify into it. That's going to create this. Now, because we're using a prefab, and this is a feature, I don't know if it exists on the free version. Um, I'm going to create a prefab, and I'm just going to leave this name the same. If you want to be a little bit more organized, you could call it covered LOD1, whatever. I'm just going to do that for the sake of time. Excuse me. And basically, enable prefab usage is going to save the mesh as opposed to just use it this one time. That's important if you're doing a prefab. Make sure you have that checked. And then you can just kind of come in here and, make it simpler. That reduced the number of trees in it and made it look simpler. It went down from 1,056 trees to 620, which is a pretty good improvement. Now we're going to do the LOD2. Same thing here. Mesh Simplify. Actually, it looks like, oh no, because we had the wrong one selected. Mesh Simplify, enable prefab, LOD2 we'll call it, and let's put this one out like 25% of its original trees. And you can tell it definitely doesn't look as good. Um, but from a distance, you can't really tell. So yeah, now we have three models with each one of varying qualities. Now on the top level object, and if your object is the top level object, you have to duplicate it and put it in its own hierarchy, and then the top level hierarchy becomes the new object. Um, in the top level one, we're going to add a component. We're going to call this LOD group. Or not LOD. We're not going to call it that, but that's what it is. And that's going to create these different sections: LOD0, LOD1, LOD2. You can see that's what we created here. If you wanted to add another, you could. You could create, a bunch of different versions of this. That's not what we did. But you don't want to create too many because if you have like a bunch of these objects all over your map, and they're all at varying distances, it's going to have to render a different mesh for each one, each LOD version that camera angle can see, and that's going to increase your draw calls because that's a different mesh for each one. Um, so you kind of want to keep it like I like to have like three versions. LOD0, remember, is ignored by the quest. I think I said that earlier, but now it might start to make a little more sense to you. Quest starts here, and that's the highest quality version it will see, and then it moves up. So we're just going to drag each of these renderers into their appropriate ones. And now when I come in close, you can see it actually shift to the higher quality version. But when you get like far away, you can't tell. The reason it's disappearing is because that's the cull. That's when it gets over here. And that's what LOD culling is. Instead of using occlusion culling, they recommend in quest scenes that you use LOD culling, and the reason is it's much more lightweight. But basically, it just says like when you get far away from the object, don't draw it. 9% way too high. We want to bring that down to like usually like 1 or 2%. Um, that way, it's still drawing it until you're really far away. You don't want stuff disappearing at great distances and players being able to be exposed. Ideally, when you get to your scene, by the way, now that we've done the prefab, both of these should be set up with LODs, and you can see as you shift away, it's changing to the lower quality versions. You can't really tell, and that's the idea. You want it to not be able to notice the difference between them, but it is rendering less trees when you're far away. Um, so, uh, the way you use LOD culling is for this particular object, you would want to find the furthest point that a player can see it from. And in this case, I believe that would be like right here. And if you set it on the prefab, it's going to change it for all of them. But if you really want to squeeze every drip of efficiency out of your map, you want to go through each object, find the furthest camera angle that you can see that from, and this distance is going to be off just because the camera angle that I'm looking at right now does not match what the quest is. So you want to change this field of view to 120. The field of view influences the LOD distance if you can see the slider moving here. And since the quest plays at 120 degrees field of view, we're going to set it to 120 and then find the farthest camera angle that can see it from. I lost the selection, but go to the farthest camera angle and you see that's at 1%. We'll drag the culling to right there about, and that way it will cull anytime the camera is further away than that. And basically you want to do this for every complicated object on your map. The more complicated the object, the more efficiency gains you'll get out of it. Um, so that's the basics of quest optimization. I've shown you how to do an LOD. I've shown you how to combine meshes and materials to reduce draw calls. LODs are going to reduce trees. You start doing this on more and more things. I'm not going to sit here and go through every complicated asset on the scene. That would just take a lot of time. Now maybe you can understand why it takes so long to make quest maps. Uh, you have to balance the draw calls and the LODs to get to eventually make it so that this here will never see more than 75 batches and 85,000 trees, which you can see we have a long ways to go here. And this is a pretty relatively simple asset pack, so this isn't too difficult to work with. This wouldn't take nearly as long as some of the other asset packs I've seen. There's more complicated things you can get into. Maybe now that oh no, my quest scene is still rendering for paintball. I can show you some of the custom work I've done there. That's kind of the basics. Beyond that, you also want to learn Blender. Now that we've created a combined mesh of this, you can see that there's some faces, or maybe not on this map, but there's some faces that like we don't really need to draw. We don't need to draw this stuff under here. I could remove that, but that requires going into Blender and actually manually removing it. I could probably make a video on that if people request it, but that's a decent amount of work for minimal buyback on terms of efficiency. Um, but what we would want to do for this scene right now is create LODs on this, create LODs on that. Basically go through and figure out 800 trees for this. That would get an LOD. We'd go through and kind of decide. This should be enough to get most people going on making quest compatible maps, but yeah, there's some other stuff I could probably show if people want. I've written a script that basically goes through every asset on your scene and separates it into one of two folders. It's going to basically look at the trees on an object and throw it into one folder if it's a high tree object, or if it's a low tree object, it will throw it into another object. And then it will say combine this stuff, um, and that will reduce your draw calls, and put LODs on this stuff, and that will reduce your trees. And it just kind of gives suggestions on what you should do. Um, and the script will just kind of sort your scene like that based on those parameters. You can put in like a phrase, for example, like box, and it will go through and find all the boxes on your scene and organize them into one thing. Yeah, there's some stuff like that I could probably show. Um, I guess one big thing I could show is I talked about it earlier. This is 75,000 trees for this combined object I made. That's too much. You don't want that many trees on an object like that. And this is a pretty quick thing I can show. So let's go back to my wall baker. MeshBaker is also another one of the features I haven't gone into yet. You can separate out these objects into separate MeshBakers. Right now it's all just in one MeshBaker. It's going to create one mesh out of it. But MeshBaker has a way to organize the stuff into different meshes. So we could take this and we could split it up into like 9 different cubes and make each of those its own mesh. That way you can LOD call each one as you go around the corner. So like it's not going to show this stuff while you're looking down here. Um, you can LOD call it until you get around the corner. And let me show you how to do that. So I can remember how to do it. Oh yeah. Um, I'm gonna delete this. Oh, whoops. Let me re-enable the renders just so we don't lose them. And I'll delete the renderer. So now we're back down to our basic scene. Um, by the way, yeah, another thing I still need to show you is how to do the lighting, and how to place the onward stuff in your map. I'm not going to do that. If you want to know how to do that stuff, watch Snooperfax's video. I did say I would talk about bakery, but he does that in his video. I figure I'm not going to waste time. There's so much other stuff I can show you. You should really watch his video in addition to this, because he kind of goes over how to make onward maps in general. This is more about the optimization of things, or at least that's what I wanted this video to be about. Okay, so back to our walls. I'm going to create a new object, and this time we're going to use a texture baker and multi-mesh baker. Same process as before. We're going to add our objects. We'll rename this to wall baker. Um, we have our things right. Let's go ahead and bake the. Oh, I forgot to click the consider mesh UVs. Oh, and we didn't create the. I probably don't need to create the material again. I just like doing it fresh, just every time I create a new baker like this. That way it's just right. I know it's right. It's doing this. I think we did finish the paintball lighting, which might be a little bit too bright. Probably need to rework that. But I can show you some of the LODs. My favorite asset producer that I have found so far is they're called like Manufactura 4 or K4 or something. They made all the assets that the original Downfall used, that the original I think Quarantine used, although I think there was a lot of changes to what they used for Quarantine. They also did the shooting range. They did like this tank came from it. Let me know if that tank looks familiar. It's in Bazaar. It's in Downfall. It's in a lot of different maps. Same with the Humvee. Um, those came from the shooting range asset pack, which was made by these people. And these models, I think I lost my inspector view. And probably my hierarchy view too. There's so many windows in Unity, I always forget where they are. Um, just to show you, this was a lot of different objects. The Humvee objects. Yeah, so like this had a bunch of different pieces, which I combined them. Same as I showed you on our other maps. So I made 3 versions, and I combined them by LOD. That's another thing I still haven't shown you. You can use MeshBaker to group stuff based on the LOD that they're in. So like this whole thing had an LOD, and I basically selected this, and um, just to show you this Humvee, there's all these different renderers in this LOD, all these different renderers in this LOD, and all this, and this asset pack came this way. Um, that's what you get when you get a higher quality asset pack. You get multiple LODs and some of the assets, and together this is 16,000 trees for LOD 0. LOD 1 is 9,000. LOD 2 is 6,000. And those kind of came. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to use Mesh Simplify to create those simpler LODs because it just came that way. And when you get assets like that, you're going to get like a higher quality. Like, you know, the LOD 0 for this one has the actual drive shaft and, just overwhelming detail. And the LOD 2, they take out that instead of just kind of like taking trees out from everywhere. And LOD 3. So you end up getting like a better looking thing. Um, like they're not going to show the interior seats on the lower LOD models. Uh, this map has some collision issues with the Humvee. You can clearly see. I'm going to fix that in the next update. But yeah, when you get a higher quality asset pack, you get stuff like that. I will say that they still require a little bit of work. For example, like these boxes here, they came with some LODs to them. It came with an LOD 0 and an LOD 1. I made the LOD 2 myself. And that's because this is 400, this is 500 trees, and it's basically a box. I mean, there is a lot of little details on them that are nice to have. Same with this one. It's nice to be able to see that stuff, but and again, we have the maximum LOD set to 1 right now, so we're not even seeing the LOD 0. And just to show you the differences, the LOD 0 would look like that. I used the collision of the LOD 0 on this box, um, and that way, like your bullets are always going to hit the LOD 0 model because that's what it looks like at full quality. Um, and yeah, I can see it if I manually select it. That's the LOD 0 model. Whereas this is what Quest will see, and this is what they'll see from a distance. This one is, oh yeah, this box actually does have a LOD 3. So 512 trees, 368. That's what Quest sees. 156. That's what Quest sees from a middle distance. And LOD 3 is 12 trees. This is the one I created myself, and that was just a cube. And I just wrapped that cube in the texture file. That's what the camera sees when it's really far away, um, which is obviously lower quality, but from a distance you won't be able to tell. It's only going to show that when it is that far away. Actually, I do have it kind of close. But yeah, you get the idea. So even though it's like a good asset pack, I wanted something with less than 156 triangles. That's the kind of work you're going to have to do if you really want to make things efficient. You have to create your own LODs and wrap the textures around them and all that other jazz. Back to our other scene. I believe we have finished baking the material on this, so let's go into the next step. Sorry to jump around on you like that. Just computers take time. Might as well fill it with knowledge. Okay, so back on our baker, we have the multi-mesh baker. Um, we have already combined our materials. This cluster by LOD, now I can kind of explain what that is. Now that you've seen LODs, you might understand that better. Basically, if you have an object like that Humvee I was showing you with multiple LODs on it, you can cluster by LOD level, and it will, let me bring it up, it will automatically create. I used it on this Humvee. It automatically created three different renderers for each of the LOD values based on what objects I had in the parent objects LODs tree. So like it combined all these, it combined all these, it combined all these into three separate mesh renderers. That way I can create an LOD and put each one in its own thing. So that's just another useful thing you can use. If you have more questions on that, I can answer them. I don't feel like explaining it right now, but I feel like I did, but I don't know if I explained it well enough. Just message me or something if you have more questions on that. But back into what we wanted to do with this one, if you remember, we wanted to split it up so that we have different meshes. It's not just one 76,000 triangle mesh. So what we do for that, we have our multi-mesh baker. Um, okay. So under cluster type, you can select the different types of clusterings you want to use. There's pie, grid, or agglomerative. I don't even know how to say that. Whatever it is. For most cases, you're going to want to use grid or the last one. Ignore the pie. From what I understand, the pie is uh, if you're playing like a game where you're in a turret and all you can do is spin in a circle. Um, you don't really need to use it. The one I was talking about was grid. Um, agglomerative, you can play with that if you want. That's actually kind of a new thing to me. So I'm not going to dig too much into that one. But I mentioned I wanted to split this up into a 3x3 grid, so I'm going to do that. Let me try to remember what these do. It's been a while. I've only used this a couple times. Origin is the starting point you want it to run this from. I think the cell size is the number of meters in each direction. So the scene will be divided into a grid of cells. Meshes in each cell will be grouped into the baker. This sets the size of those cells. Um, so forgive me if I'm mistaken on this. I think what it's saying is how big do you want those groups to be? And I'm just gonna estimate it here. I think this is mm, like 120 meters by 80 meters or something like that. So 120 divided by 3, if I wanted to split it into a 3 by 3 group, would be like 40. And we'll just do 40 by 40. And for the z-axis, we want the whole thing, so we'll just do 100. Now you can see the different areas it's going to try to bake into. I am going to set this to like negative 20, just so, or not the z-axis, the y-axis, negative 20. I think that's the one I wanted 100 on. This is 40. So that way we kind of get like a 9 by 9 grid there. Maybe make it a little smaller. It doesn't look like it quite did a 9 by 9. Like that. Whatever. Maybe it's not a 3 by 3, but we have it kind of clustered. So now it's going to take the objects in each one of these and create a separate mesh baker for each one. So that's what this generate mesh bakers does. I'm going to click that, and we're going to delete the old one just because, scrap it. And it generated all the different mesh bakers for each of those subsections. Now we already baked the material, so each of these subsections is going to use its the same material, but they will have different meshes. So each one of these is going to be one more draw call, but we will be able to separate it out. So now I'm going to bake all the child mesh bakers. Not sure if that's quick or not. Oh, yep, it's done. So it created all of these renderers. Um, and you can see here how they're divided up now by different sections. Um, and then back to our baker, we want to disable the renders on the source ones. So now what we have is a bunch of different meshes that are all kind of divided up by their general area. And I'm trying to move it, but I'm not. Oh, there it is. Because I didn't like set each one to the origin. So now, if I wanted to, I could create an LOD on this and cull it when a player can't see that section, or when the camera is far enough away where it can't see that section. Or you can use a collision culling. Again, that's CPU intensive, but let me show you what that looks like just to show you. I just baked the occlusion culling. Now I'm going to find my camera so I can view it. And now you can see when I drag the camera around, it's not going to show, or it shouldn't show. I might have to set the occlusion culling right, but you get the idea. Now it doesn't have to draw all 76,000 trees. It can just draw the pieces that you can see. And you can either do that with the collision culling or LOD culling. But yeah, that's kind of the last thing I wanted to show you. I didn't go into that last MeshBaker agglutinative or whatever you call it thing I was talking about. That basically does the same thing as this grid, but instead of using a grid, it does stuff by its relative location to one another. So it tries to like kind of group things by area. And if you use a combination of that and grouping by LOD, you can really get some efficiency, and you start to really complicate your scene in terms of what's going on. You can start to have a lot of different meshes with a lot of different things going on. And if you really want to get into optimization, though, that's what you should do. Kind of just use a combination of these things. And these tools are kind of like auto-generating the areas for you, but you can come in here, and manually add things to these different bakers. So like if I don't like how I was noticing on this one, if I could just get this wall piece into this group over here, then I could probably call this when the camera gets here instead of like way back here, where it's out of view now, Um, so you could really go in and customize it. I think you get better results when you do things by hand like that. You're going to get a little bit more efficiency, but it takes more time and it becomes more of a maintenance nightmare trying to keep everything in the right baker and everything set right. It starts to get a little bit more complicated. Um, if this isn't complicated enough already, but I think that kind of covers it. That's kind of the stuff you need to do to get quest optimization running. It probably seems like a lot. There's a lot going on here, but the more you practice with it, the easier it gets. I promise you. And um, yeah, uh, I think that's about all I care to share right now. Maybe I'll make another video at some point in the future. Just kind of show some more advanced stuff. Some of the scripts I've written to kind of automate some of these things. Um, yeah, I'm gonna call it. Good luck.